Humanity's worst fears materialized the day the Arcanian ships descended from the skies. Their arrival wasn't heralded by demands or diplomacy, only silence, followed by chaos. Towering figures clad in metallic armor strode into cities, their shimmering energy shields deflecting bullets like raindrops against glass. Automated drones hummed above them, scanning and neutralizing any resistance. The Arcanians didn't speak the human tongue, but their disdain was palpable. Their advanced technology had made their victory seem inevitable, their confidence unshakable. In the small town of Ridgepoint, nestled at the base of the Rocky Mountains, fear spread like wildfire. News traveled fast, major cities had fallen, and the world's militaries were struggling to make even a dent in the invaders' defenses. The people of Ridgepoint knew it was only a matter of time before the Arcanians reached them. Panic set in, but for some, survival instincts took over. Among them was Riley Kane, though not in the way the townsfolk expected. High above the chaos, she sat alone in a cabin, rifle leaning against the wall. For years, Riley had lived a life of solitude, far removed from the world she once fought to protect. A former sniper with countless missions under her belt, she had walked away from the battlefield after her last mission left her squad dead and her spirit fractured. The mountains offered her the peace she thought she'd never find again. But peace, it seemed, was fleeting. The first sign of the invasion in Ridgepoint was the tremor of the ground, followed by a faint mechanical hum growing louder. Riley stood at the edge of her porch, binoculars in hand, watching the procession of Arcanian forces enter the valley. Their formation was perfect, methodical. Drones flitted above, casting ominous shadows over the terrain. In the center of the convoy marched a group of heavily armed soldiers, their armor gleaming under the midday sun. Riley's grip tightened on the binoculars. She hadn't seen that kind of precision since her military days. Yet, even in their perfection, the Arcanians carried themselves with an arrogance that grated on her nerves. They were too confident, too secure in their technology. She could tell by the way they walked, their shields flickering lazily as though nothing could touch them. Her gaze shifted to the town below. Through the lens, she saw a scene that made her stomach churn, civilians being rounded up by the invaders. An elderly man who refused to move fast enough was struck down without hesitation. A mother clutched her crying child, her face etched with terror. Riley's jaw clenched as the scene unfolded. This wasn't war, it was subjugation. She put the binoculars down, her heart racing. Memories of her past flooded back, the weight of lives she had taken and those she had failed to save pressing against her chest. This wasn't her fight anymore, she reminded herself. She had given everything she had to the world, and in return, it had left her broken. She owed humanity nothing. But then she saw them, a small group of resistance fighters, armed with outdated rifles and makeshift explosives, trying to push back against the Arcanians. Their efforts were futile, energy blasts cut through their defenses with ease. Yet they didn't stop. Among them was a young boy, barely a teenager, clutching a weapon far too big for his frame. He wasn't fighting, he was shielding someone behind him. A girl, even younger. Riley closed her eyes, trying to block out the sight, but the images burned into her mind. She saw herself in that boy, determined, desperate, and far too young to bear the weight of the world. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze fell on her rifle. It hadn't been used in years, yet it gleamed as though waiting for this moment. She stood frozen for a moment, torn between the life she had built and the person she once was. Then a scream pierced the air, echoing up the valley. Riley grabbed her rifle before she even realized what she was doing. Inside the cabin, her movements were automatic, practiced. She checked the scope, the barrel, the ammunition. Everything was still in working order, as though it had been waiting for her return. With a deep breath, she slung the rifle over her shoulder and stepped outside. The hike up the mountain was grueling, but Riley's mind was clear. She knew the terrain better than anyone and used it to her advantage, finding a vantage point overlooking the valley. From here, she had a clear view of the Arcanians' movements and the resistance fighters below. Her pulse steadied as she settled into position, the rifle snug against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the young boy again, now crouched behind a pile of rubble, his face streaked with dirt and tears. An Arcanian soldier loomed over him, raising a weapon. Riley inhaled sharply, aligning her crosshairs with the soldier's head. Her finger hovered over the trigger, hesitation creeping in. Then she heard her mentor's voice, clear as day, *. Trust the shot. Trust yourself. *. The crack of the rifle shattered the silence. The Arcanian soldier crumpled to the ground, his shield useless against the force of the bullet. Riley exhaled, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over her. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now. Through the scope, she saw the boy glance up, his expression shifting from fear to awe. The resistance fighters rallied, emboldened by the mysterious force that had taken down their enemy. Riley stayed hidden, watching as the Arcanians scrambled to pinpoint her location. They wouldn't find her. She was too good for that. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Adjusting her scope, Riley scanned the battlefield, her heart steady as she took aim at her next target. The shot reverberated through the valley, leaving a ripple of chaos in its wake. The Arcanians froze, their automated systems scrambling to identify the source of the attack. Their soldiers, confident in their invulnerability, stared at the fallen body of their commander, a neat hole in his helmet. The shimmering energy shield meant to make him untouchable had failed spectacularly. Riley adjusted her position, shifting to a new vantage point with practiced efficiency. She knew better than to linger. Through the scope of her rifle, she observed the Arcanians react. Drones buzzed to life, their sensors scanning the terrain in sweeping patterns, searching for an anomaly their programming couldn't explain. Riley smirked. She wasn't an anomaly. She was human, unpredictable and precise in a way their algorithms couldn't fathom. The resistance fighters below seized the moment. Encouraged by the sudden, mysterious intervention, they rallied, launching a desperate counterattack. They moved with renewed vigor, targeting vulnerable supply lines and exposed flanks. The Arcanians, distracted by their search for the sniper, faltered. Their rigid reliance on hierarchy and protocols left them ill-prepared for such chaotic assaults. Riley watched the skirmish unfold, her rifle a silent sentinel as she waited for the next crucial target. Her eyes caught movement, a high-ranking officer gesturing to regroup the forces. Riley steadied her aim, tracking the target. The crosshairs aligned. She fired. Another Arcanian fell, their advanced armor crumpling under the sheer kinetic power of her bullet. The enemy's ranks broke further as confusion spread. They weren't used to such losses, especially from an unseen assailant. The drones swarmed closer, their scanners attempting to penetrate the natural cover of the rocky terrain. Riley anticipated this. She had chosen her location carefully, blending into the environment with expert precision. The technology the Arcanians relied upon was sophisticated, but it couldn't account for her intimate knowledge of the land or her ability to outthink it. Each shot she took was deliberate. She didn't waste ammunition, and she didn't aim for just any soldier. Riley targeted their leaders, the ones giving orders, the ones keeping the rest of the Arcanian forces moving. With every high-ranking officer she eliminated, the enemy's chain of command fractured further. Their once organized lines devolved into scattered units, their advanced tactics rendered useless by the absence of clear direction. Between shots, Riley listened to the Resistance's radio chatter, which crackled faintly through a small receiver clipped to her gear. The voices were full of disbelief and hope. "Who's helping us? Is it another squad? Reinforcements?" Riley didn't respond. She wasn't interested in glory or recognition. Her actions were about leveling the playing field, giving humanity a fighting chance against an overwhelming enemy. As she moved to another position, memories of her past crept into her mind. The rhythm of her actions, the methodical way she loaded her rifle, scanned for targets, and took her shots, brought her back to the missions that had once defined her life. She had been part of elite units, taking out targets at impossible distances. But those days had left scars, both physical and emotional. She had walked away from it all, swearing never to take another life. Yet here she was, a sniper again, using the very skills she had tried to bury to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Arcanians adapted slowly, their arrogance blinding them to the reality of the situation. They sent a squad of heavily armored soldiers into the mountains, each equipped with advanced tracking devices and weaponry designed to root out threats. Riley watched their approach through her scope, calculating their movements. They were efficient but predictable, moving in formation, their paths dictated by their technology. She set a trap, using a decoy signal to lure them into a narrow pass. When they arrived, she picked them off one by one, her bullets piercing their shields before they could react. Their technology, so advanced and complex, was powerless against her simple, calculated strikes. The Arcanians had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and improvise, qualities their rigid systems couldn't replicate. Each encounter brought new challenges, and Riley rose to meet them with the same calm determination that had earned her a reputation as one of the best snipers in the military. She switched positions frequently, never giving the enemy a chance to pinpoint her location. She used the terrain to her advantage, exploiting every ridge, boulder, and shadow to stay one step ahead. Her knowledge of ballistics, wind patterns, and elevation allowed her to make shots that seemed impossible even to her. The resistance fighters, emboldened by her continued support, began coordinating more effectively. They struck supply depots, sabotaged communication lines, and set traps of their own. Riley's presence had become a force multiplier, her unseen hand guiding their efforts. Each success chipped away at the Arcanians' confidence, turning their once assured victory into a costly struggle. As night fell, Riley took a moment to rest, her rifle across her lap. The stars above were cold and distant, but they reminded her of what was at stake. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for its right to exist, to prove that it couldn't be erased so easily. Riley's hands ached, her body protesting the strain, but she pushed the pain aside. She wasn't done yet. Through her scope, she spotted another high-value target, a commander overseeing the deployment of reinforcements. Riley adjusted her aim, her breathing steady as she calculated the shot. The bullet traveled silently through the night, its impact sending another shockwave through the enemy forces. The Arcanians would remember this day, not for their victory, but for the beginning of their unraveling. Riley wasn't just a sniper, she was a reminder of humanity's resilience, a force the Arcanians couldn't have prepared for. The Arcanians were no longer underestimating the threat. What they had initially dismissed as an isolated anomaly had now become a persistent thorn in their side. Their commanders were dropping too quickly, their carefully planned formations were collapsing, and the resistance fighters on the ground had transformed from a nuisance into a coordinated problem. The sniper was no longer a mystery to be ignored, she was a priority. Riley observed their response through her scope. The Arcanians were sending reinforcements, elite squads equipped with experimental tracking systems and enhanced energy shields. These soldiers were faster, more agile, and trained to flush out hidden threats. Their confidence radiated in every movement, but Riley had seen confidence crumble before. They began sweeping the valley with precision, their drones mapping every crevice, their soldiers probing every shadow. But Riley was prepared. She had studied their tactics, noted their patterns, and anticipated their moves. They relied too much on their technology, assuming it was infallible. She exploited that assumption at every turn. As the first squad moved into a narrow pass, Riley triggered a set of improvised distractions. A small explosion sent them scattering into defensive positions, and their scanners pinged wildly, detecting phantom signals planted by Riley to mislead them. She waited, patient and steady, for the moment when one of them stepped into her sights. The shot was clean, the soldier's shield crumbling under the force of her bullet. Panic rippled through the remaining squad as they realized their prey was hunting them. Riley shifted positions immediately, her movements precise and silent. She knew the Arcanians would adapt quickly, and staying in one place was a death sentence. From her new vantage point, she tracked the squad's attempts to regroup. Their communications were chaotic, their voices betraying an unfamiliar fear. They were used to overwhelming superiority, not a relentless, invisible foe who could strike without warning. She picked off another soldier, then another, each shot calculated to sow maximum confusion. The survivors faltered, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Their sophisticated scanners were useless in the face of her low-tech approach. Riley used no electronics, no signals that could be traced, only her rifle, her instincts, and the terrain. It was a battle of precision against arrogance, and arrogance was losing. The resistance fighters, emboldened by her continued success, began launching coordinated strikes. They targeted supply depots, sabotaged communications, and ambushed smaller patrols. Riley's actions had given them hope, but it was more than that. She had shown them that the Arcanians weren't invincible. They could be beaten, not with superior technology, but with strategy, patience, and determination. As the resistance gained ground, the Arcanians became more desperate. Their movements grew erratic, their soldiers more reckless. They deployed experimental drones designed to scan for heat signatures, hoping to flush Riley out. She countered by using the natural environment to mask her presence. Cold streams and dense foliage became her allies, rendering the drone's sensors ineffective. The Arcanians had designed their technology to fight armies, not individuals who knew how to disappear into the land. Riley's focus remained unbroken. Every target she eliminated was chosen for its impact. She avoided unnecessary kills, conserving her ammunition for officers and specialists whose loss would cripple the enemy's operations. Each shot was a message: your shields can't save you, your drones can't find me, and your arrogance is your undoing. As the days wore on, the Arcanians began to change their tactics. They abandoned their rigid formations, opting for smaller, more mobile units. It was a shift Riley had anticipated. She adjusted her own strategy, setting traps that funneled them into kill zones where she could pick them off at her leisure. Her actions forced the Arcanians to expend resources at an unsustainable rate. For every squad they sent after her, she used minimal effort to dismantle them. But Riley wasn't immune to the strain. The constant vigilance, the physical toll of moving through rugged terrain, and the weight of her past pressed heavily on her. She hadn't planned for this fight to last so long. Supplies were running low, and exhaustion threatened to dull her edge. Yet she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the resistance was finally gaining the upper hand. Through her scope, she spotted a convoy carrying reinforcements and supplies to the Arcanian forward base. It was heavily guarded, but Riley saw the cracks in their defense. She took out the lead vehicle's driver, causing a chain reaction as the convoy ground to a halt. The resistance fighters, lying in wait, launched their assault, overwhelming the confused and disorganized Arcanians. It was a decisive victory, and one that wouldn't have been possible without Riley's intervention. The Arcanians' frustration was palpable. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Riley knew they were adapting, but she also knew their adaptability had limits. They relied on systems and algorithms to make decisions, and those systems couldn't account for the human factor, the ability to think creatively, to improvise, and to endure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Riley prepared for the next phase of the fight. She wasn't just a sniper anymore, she was the pivot point of a growing resistance. The Arcanians had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had found a battlefield where their superiority meant nothing and a foe they couldn't comprehend. Riley's rifle was her voice, and with every shot she reminded them of a truth they had forgotten: humanity would never be conquered so easily. The Arcanians had reached their breaking point. What had begun as a calculated campaign of domination had turned into a costly quagmire. Their forces were stretched thin, their supply lines were in tatters, and their morale had begun to waver. Riley's relentless precision had not only decimated their leadership but had also shattered their perception of invincibility. Yet, despite the mounting losses, the Arcanians refused to retreat. Instead, they regrouped for a final push, determined to crush the resistance and silence the sniper who had become their greatest obstacle. Word reached Riley through intercepted communications. A high-ranking general would be arriving to personally oversee the Arcanian forces. It was a desperate move, but it also presented an opportunity. Taking out the general wouldn't just cripple their command structure, It would deal a psychological blow from which the Arcanians might never recover. Riley knew what she had to do. She spent hours preparing for the shot. The general's arrival point was a heavily fortified location surrounded by layers of defenses. Drones patrolled the skies, soldiers guarded every possible approach, and automated turrets scanned for threats. The Arcanians had spared no effort in securing their most valuable asset. But Riley wasn't planning to get close. Her plan relied on precision, patience, and a clear line of sight from over 2 miles away. She scouted the terrain, finding a vantage point that offered both cover and the necessary elevation for the shot. The distance was beyond what most snipers would even attempt, but Riley had made similar shots before, and she trusted her instincts. As the sun rose on the day of the general's arrival, she settled into position, her breathing steady and her mind focused. Through her scope, Riley observed the Arcanian forces moving into position. The general's arrival was marked by a convoy of sleek, heavily armored vehicles flanked by squads of elite soldiers. The general himself, a towering figure clad in ornate armor, stepped out and began issuing orders. Riley took her time, studying his movements, waiting for the perfect moment. The wind was light but variable, the kind of subtle factor that could ruin a shot if not accounted for. Riley adjusted her aim, factoring in the distance, the angle, and the speed of her target. She exhaled slowly, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. This wasn't just another shot, this was the culmination of everything she had done, every choice she had made since the Arcanians arrived. The moment came. The general paused, his head turning slightly as if sensing something. Riley fired. The bullet traveled silently across the expanse, its trajectory precise and unyielding. The impact was instantaneous, the general's body crumpling to the ground before anyone could react. Chaos erupted among the Arcanian forces as soldiers scrambled to locate the source of the shot. But Riley was already on the move, dismantling her position and disappearing into the rugged terrain. The general's death sent shockwaves through the Arcanian ranks. Their carefully constructed command structure collapsed, leaving lower-ranking officers scrambling to take control. The resistance seized the moment, launching coordinated attacks on key targets. Without leadership or direction, the Arcanians faltered, their advanced technology rendered useless by their inability to adapt to the chaos. Riley watched from a distance as the resistance fighters pushed the Arcanians back. Her part in the battle was over, but she felt no relief, only a quiet sense of resolution. She had done what she could, and now it was up to humanity to finish the fight. As she packed her rifle and began the long trek back to her cabin, she reflected on what the Arcanians had underestimated most. It wasn't humanity's technology or its weapons, it was the will to resist, to fight against impossible odds, and to adapt in ways no algorithm could predict. The Arcanians called for a retreat within days. Their invasion, which had begun with the assumption of easy victory, ended in humiliation. Riley's actions became a legend among the resistance, her name whispered with reverence by those who had fought alongside her, and those who had been inspired by her. Yet she sought no recognition, no reward. Her goal had never been glory, it had been survival, and perhaps redemption. Back in her cabin, Riley sat on her porch, the rifle resting at her side. The world was quieter now, though she knew the scars of the invasion would linger for years. The resistance had proven that humanity couldn't be conquered so easily, that even in the face of overwhelming force, there was always a way to fight back. And in the end, that resilience was what made humanity truly unstoppable. Riley gazed out at the mountains, the weight of her choices settling over her like a familiar companion. She hadn't just fought for survival, she had fought for the idea that humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons or its technology but in its determination to endure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace, knowing she had done her part.